I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the official-looking letter taped to my gate with the words, "Notice of Annexation," printed across the top in bold red letters. My name is Nathan Ashford, and I have owned my 60-acre ranch in rural Bexar County, Texas, for the better part of 15 years. The property sits about 8 miles outside of San Antonio, far enough from the city that I can enjoy the peace and quiet that comes with wide open spaces, grazing cattle, and the kind of privacy that money cannot buy anywhere near the suburbs. My nearest neighbor is half a mile down the road, and that is exactly how I like it. I'd never had any issues with local government, never violated any county ordinances, and always paid my property taxes on time. So when I pulled that letter off my gate on a humid Tuesday morning in late April, I had absolutely no idea what kind of nightmare was about to unfold. The letter claimed that my property was being annexed into the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association jurisdiction. According to the document, my ranch now fell under their regulatory authority, and I would be required to pay annual HOA fees of $2,400, comply with their community standards, and submit to property inspections. The letter was signed by one Susan Carmichael, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. I stood there in my driveway, dust from my morning chores still clinging to my boots, reading and rereading the letter 3 times to make sure I was not losing my mind. Meadowbrook Estates was a cookie-cutter suburban development that had sprung up about 2 miles east of my property roughly 5 years ago. The place was filled with identical beige houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and the kind of people who measured their grass with rulers to ensure it did not exceed the 2-inch maximum height requirement. I had driven past it a few times and felt sorry for anyone who had to live under those kinds of restrictions. But this was insane. My ranch was not part of their neighborhood. There was literally 2 miles of undeveloped land between my property line and the nearest house in Meadowbrook Estates. We were not even in the same postal zone. I crumpled the letter in my fist and walked back toward my house, already pulling out my phone to call my attorney. Mitchell Henderson had been my lawyer for over a decade, handling everything from property disputes to contract negotiations when I sold cattle. He was a straightforward guy who did not mince words, and I trusted him completely. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "They what?" Mitchell finally said, his tone somewhere between disbelief and amusement. "They are claiming my ranch is now part of their HOA jurisdiction. They want me to pay fees and follow their rules." "Nathan, that's not how HOAs work. You have to voluntarily enter into a covenant agreement when you purchase property. You cannot just be annexed into one." That is what I thought, but this letter makes it sound official. They are using legal language in everything. Send me a copy. I will look into it, but I can tell you right now, this is complete nonsense. Do not respond to them, and definitely do not pay anything. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Mitchell, then spent the rest of the day trying to focus on ranch work. I had fences that needed mending, hay that needed moving, and a pregnant mare that required monitoring. But my mind kept drifting back to that ridiculous letter. Who did these people think they were? 2 days later, Mitchell called me back. I did some digging. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA filed paperwork with the county attempting to expand their jurisdiction. They are claiming that because there is potential for development in the area between their neighborhood and your property, they have the right to preemptively establish authority over surrounding land. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. You will get no argument from me. The problem is, they actually submitted this paperwork, and it is sitting in the county clerk's office. Now, the good news is that the clerk has not approved anything. The bad news is that Susan Carmichael and her board seem to think they can bully you into compliance before anyone officially shuts them down. So what do? We need to go to the county clerk's office and make sure this gets rejected formally. I will set up an appointment. In the meantime, if anyone from the HOA shows up at your property, do not engage with them. Just tell them to contact me. That seemed simple enough, but I should have known nothing involving an HOA would ever be simple. The following Saturday morning, I was out in the south pasture checking on my cattle when I heard vehicles approaching. I turned to see 3 SUVs rolling down my long driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. My stomach sank. I had a pretty good idea who this was. The vehicles parked in a neat row near my barn, and 6 people climbed out. 5 of them looked like typical suburban professionals dressed in business casual despite it being the weekend. The 6th person, a woman in her mid-40s with an aggressively styled blonde bob and oversized sunglasses, immediately strode toward me with the kind of confidence that suggested she had never been told no in her entire life. "You must be Nathan Ashford," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I am Susan Carmichael, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. We are here to conduct an initial property inspection." I crossed my arms and stayed exactly where I was, which was about 20 feet away from her. "No, you are not." Her smile did not waver, but something cold flickered behind those sunglasses. "Excuse me? You are not conducting any inspection. This is private property, and you do not have any authority here." "Actually, we do. Did you not receive our annexation notice?" "I received a piece of paper that is worth less than the tape you used to stick it to my gate. You have no legal right to be here, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave." One of the men in her group, a balding guy with a clipboard, stepped forward. "Sir, we are simply trying to ensure that all properties in our expanded district meet community standards. This is for the benefit of everyone. I am not in your district. My property is not part of your HOA. And even if it were, which it is not, you would need permission to enter private property." Susan removed her sunglasses and I could see the irritation plain on her face. "Mr. Ashford, I do not think you understand the situation. Meadowbrook Estates is a premier community with high standards. We cannot have properties like this bringing down everyone's property values." "Properties like what?" She gestured vaguely at my ranch. "This. It is unkempt. The fencing is mismatched. You have livestock, which creates odors and unsightly conditions. Your barn needs painting. Frankly, this entire operation looks like something out of the last century." I felt my jaw tighten. "This is a working cattle ranch. It has been here decades longer than your little suburban neighborhood, and it will be here long after you are gone." "Not if you are not in compliance with community standards," Susan said sweetly. "We have the authority to levy fines for violations. Those fines can accumulate quickly. We have also been known to place liens on properties when owners refuse to cooperate." That was a threat, plain and simple. I pulled out my phone. "You are all trespassing. You have about 60 seconds to get back in your vehicles and leave before I call the sheriff." The group exchanged glances. Susan's smile had vanished entirely now. "This is not over, Mr. Ashford. We will be back with the proper documentation." "Talk to my lawyer," I said, then rattled off Mitchell Henderson's phone number. "Any further communication goes through him. Now, get off my property." They left, but the look Susan gave me as she climbed back into her SUV made it clear this was far from finished. I watched them drive away, then immediately called Mitchell and told him what had happened. "They actually showed up at your property?" He sounded more angry than surprised. "That is harassment. I'm going to send them a cease and desist letter immediately." "Do we have that appointment with the county clerk yet?" "Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock. We will get this sorted out." Tuesday could not come fast enough. Over the weekend, I received 2 more letters from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, each one more aggressive than the last. The first informed me that I was in violation of multiple community standards and was being fined $500. The second stated that my failure to respond to their communications was itself a violation and added another $250 fine. I did not respond to either one. Mitchell had been clear. No contact, no payments, no engagement whatsoever. But it was infuriating to be harassed like this on my own property. Tuesday afternoon, Mitchell and I drove to the Bexar County Clerk's office in downtown San Antonio. The building was a large government complex with the kind of bureaucratic atmosphere that made everything feel like it took twice as long as it should. We checked in at the front desk and were directed to the 3rd floor, where we were supposed to meet with Rachel Delgado, the county clerk. Rachel turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her office was organized chaos, with filing cabinets lining every wall and stacks of paperwork on every available surface. She gestured for us to sit in the 2 chairs across from her desk. "Mr. Ashford, Mr. Henderson, I understand you have some concerns about an HOA annexation claim?" Mitchell leaned forward. More than concerns. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA has been harassing my client, claiming that his property has been annexed into their jurisdiction. They have sent threatening letters, showed up at his property uninvited, and are attempting to levy fines. We need to know what authority, if any, they have. Rachel pulled out a file from one of her desk drawers and opened it. I could see the Meadowbrook Estates letterhead on several documents inside. She flipped through them, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. "Let me be very clear," she said after a moment. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA filed paperwork attempting to expand their jurisdictional boundaries. However, this office has not approved any such expansion, nor would we. HOAs do not have the authority to unilaterally annex properties into their jurisdiction. "So my client's property is not part of their HOA?" Mitchell asked. "Not even remotely. An HOA's authority is established through deed restrictions and covenant agreements that are filed when a subdivision is platted and recorded. Property owners must voluntarily enter into these agreements, typically at the time of purchase. You cannot simply expand an HOA's boundaries to include properties that were never part of the original development." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "So all those letters they sent me, the fines, the threats, completely baseless," Rachel said firmly. "They have zero legal authority over your property. If they continue to harass you, that is a matter for law enforcement or civil court." Mitchell was taking notes. "Can you provide us with a formal statement to that effect? Something we can send to the HOA to make it absolutely clear they need to back off?" "Absolutely. I will draft a letter stating that this office has not approved any annexation and that Mr. Ashford's property is not subject to Meadowbrook Estates HOA authority. Furthermore, I will be sending the HOA board a formal notice that their annexation request is denied and that any further attempts to claim jurisdiction over properties outside their recorded boundaries will be considered fraudulent misrepresentation." "Thank you," I said, feeling like I could finally breathe again. "These people have been making my life hell." Rachel shook her head. "Unfortunately, HOA boards sometimes get overzealous and overstep their authority. It is usually because they do not fully understand the legal limitations of their position, but in this case, it sounds like they knew exactly what they were doing and just hoped you would not fight back." We left the county clerk's office with copies of Rachel's letter, and Mitchell promised to send it to Susan Carmichael and the entire Meadowbrook Estates HOA board via certified mail. I felt vindicated, but I also knew people like Susan did not take rejection well. I had a feeling this was not over yet. I was right. 3 days after Mitchell sent the county clerk's letter, I received a response from Susan. It was not an apology or an acknowledgement that they had been wrong. Instead, it was a 6-page document claiming that the county clerk had misinterpreted the situation and that Meadowbrook Estates had consulted with their own legal counsel, who assured them they were within their rights. Mitchell read the letter over the phone to me, his voice tight with frustration. "This is complete garbage. They are doubling down instead of admitting they were wrong." "What can they actually do at this point?" I asked. "Legally? Nothing. They have no authority, and the county clerk has confirmed that in writing. But they can continue to harass you, and unfortunately, that is not always easy to stop. We could pursue a restraining order or file a harassment lawsuit, but that takes time and money. I just want them to leave me alone." "I know. Let me send them another letter making it clear that any further contact will result in legal action. Sometimes that's enough to make people back off." It was not enough. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. I received daily letters from the HOA, each one more ridiculous than the last. They claimed I was in violation of noise ordinances because my rooster crowed in the morning. They said my cattle were creating a public nuisance. They even tried to argue that my ranch's rustic aesthetic was bringing down property values for the entire region. Then they started showing up again. Not Susan this time, but other board members and random Meadowbrook Estates residents. They would drive slowly past my property, taking photos. A few times, I caught people actually standing on my land, measuring things or taking notes. Each time I had to go out and tell them to leave. And each time, they acted like I was the one being unreasonable. One afternoon in early May, I was repairing a section of fence near the road when a woman in yoga pants and a visor approached me. She had that particular blend of fake friendliness and entitlement that I had come to associate with the Meadowbrook crowd. "Hi there," she said brightly. "I am Jennifer. I live in Meadowbrook Estates. I just wanted to introduce myself since we are practically neighbors now." "We are not neighbors," I said, not looking up from the fence post I was setting. "And your HOA has no authority over my property." "Oh, I know there has been some confusion about that," she said, as if we were discussing a simple misunderstanding. "But I think once you see the benefits of being part of our community, you will feel differently. We have wonderful events, very friendly people." "I am not interested. We also have standards that help everyone maintain their property values. For example, that barn of yours could really use some fresh paint. We have approved color palettes that would really brighten up the place." I stopped working and looked at her directly. "My barn is fine the way it is, and even if it was not, that would be none of your business." Her smile tightened. "I'm just trying to be helpful." "You can be helpful by going back to your neighborhood and leaving me alone." She left in a huff, and I went back to my fence. But that night, I got a call from Mitchell. "Nathan, we have a problem. The HOA filed a complaint with the county about your property. They are claiming you are operating a commercial livestock operation without the proper zoning permits." "That is ridiculous. This ranch has been here for decades. It is grandfathered in." "I know that, and you know that, but now we have to prove it. The county is sending an inspector out next week." "This is insane. It is harassment, plain and simple. But we have to play along because if we ignore the county, that actually could cause you problems." The county inspector showed up the following Thursday. His name was Tom Rodriguez, and he seemed annoyed before he even got out of his truck. "Mr. Ashford, I am here about a complaint regarding your livestock operation." "Come on in," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I will show you whatever you need to see." Tom followed me around the property for about an hour. I showed him my records, my permits, the documentation proving that the ranch had been in continuous operation since the 1970s. He took notes, asked a few questions, and generally seemed like he was going through the motions. "Who filed the complaint?" I asked as we walked back toward his truck. "Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They have been filing a lot of complaints lately." He shook his head. "Between you and me, they are wasting everyone's time. Your operation is completely legal. Everything is grandfathered in, and you are well within agricultural zoning regulations." "So I am good?" "You are fine. I will submit my report, and that will be the end of it. But if I were you, I would consider taking legal action against that HOA. They are clearly harassing you." "We are working on it." After Tom left, I called Mitchell and told him what happened. He was not surprised. "They are trying to bury you in bureaucracy. Every complaint they file, every inspection you have to deal with, costs you time and stress. They are hoping you will just give up and either pay them to go away or move." "That is not going to happen." "I know. But we need to be proactive here. I am drafting a harassment lawsuit. We are going to hit them where it hurts." The lawsuit was filed in Bezar County District Court 2 weeks later. We were suing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We asked for damages to cover legal fees, compensation for the time I had lost dealing with their nonsense, and a permanent injunction prohibiting them from contacting me or making any further claims about my property. I thought that would be enough to make them stop. I was wrong again. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, I woke up to find my front gate blocked by 2 cars. Both had signs in their windows reading, "Stop Animal Cruelty" and "Factory Farms Hurt Communities." About a dozen people were standing around with more signs, chanting something I could not quite make out from my house. I drove my truck down to the gate and got out. The protesters immediately surrounded me, shouting about animal rights and environmental destruction. I recognized a few faces from Meadowbrook Estates, including Jennifer, the woman who had approached me about painting my barn. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. A man with a megaphone stepped forward. "We are here to protest the inhumane conditions at this factory farm." "This is not a factory farm. This is a small cattle ranch, and you are all trespassing." "We have a right to peaceful protest," Jennifer said, holding up her sign. "Not on private property, you do not. Move your cars, or I am calling the sheriff." They did not move. I called the sheriff. Bexar County Sheriff's deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. The protesters suddenly became a lot less bold when actual law enforcement showed up. The deputies made them move their cars and clear the area, and they issued warnings about trespassing. But as the crowd dispersed, Susan Carmichael herself appeared, apparently having been filming the whole thing on her phone. "This is not over, Mr. Ashford," she called out. "The community deserves to know what kind of operation you are running here." One of the deputies, a tall guy named Officer Martinez, walked over to her. "Madam, if you continue to harass this property owner, you will be arrested for trespassing and harassment. Do you understand?" Susan's expression went cold. "I understand that some people think they are above community standards." "Madam, do you understand what I just said?" "Yes." "Then I suggest you leave and do not come back." Susan left, but not before giving me one last look that promised this was far from over. Officer Martinez came over to me after everyone had cleared out. "You are Nathan Ashford, right? The guy with the lawsuit against the Meadowbrook HOA?" "That's me." "Good. I hope you nail them. We have been getting calls about them for months now. They are a nightmare." "You're telling me. If they pull anything like this again, call us immediately and document everything, photos, videos, dates, and times. It will help your case." I took his advice seriously. I installed security cameras around my property, covering all the main access points in the areas near the road. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with anyone from Meadowbrook Estates, and I forwarded everything to Mitchell. The lawsuit moved slowly, as lawsuits tend to do. There were motions, counter-motions, discovery requests. The HOA's lawyers tried to get the case dismissed, claiming we had not proven actual damages. Mitchell fought back hard, documenting every instance of harassment, every frivolous complaint they had filed, every hour I had lost dealing with their nonsense. Then, in late June, something interesting happened. Mitchell called me with news. "Nathan, you are not going to believe this. I just got a call from the Texas Attorney General's office. They are investigating Meadowbrook Estates HOA for fraud." "Fraud?" "Apparently, you are not the only person they tried to annex. They have been attempting this with several other properties in the area, including a horse ranch about 4 miles from you and a small farm owned by an elderly couple. They have been collecting HOA fees from these people for over a year." "Are you serious?" "Completely. The couple paid because they did not know any better, and the HOA never told them they had no legal obligation to do so. That is fraud. The AG is considering criminal charges." I felt a surge of vindication. Good. They deserve it. There is more. The AG's office wants to talk to you. They are building a case and need testimony from everyone the HOA has targeted. I met with investigators from the Texas Attorney General's office the following week. They were thorough, asking detailed questions about every interaction I had with the HOA, every letter they had sent, every threat they had made. I provided them with copies of everything, including the security footage of the protesters blocking my gate. "Mr. Ashford, you should know that this investigation goes beyond just annexation fraud," one of the investigators told me. "We have evidence that the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board has been misappropriating funds, inflating fees without proper authorization, and engaging in a pattern of harassment against multiple individuals. This is a significant case. What happens now? We continue building our case. If we find sufficient evidence of criminal activity, we will pursue charges. In the meantime, we will be issuing a cease and desist order to the HOA, prohibiting them from contacting you or any other affected parties." That cease and desist order arrived at Meadowbrook Estates about 3 days later, and according to Mitchell, it caused absolute chaos. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, and several board members immediately resigned. Susan Carmichael, however, did not resign. She doubled down, insisting that the HOA had done nothing wrong and that this was all a misunderstanding. But the state of Texas did not agree. In mid-July, the Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against Susan Carmichael and 2 other board members for fraud, theft, and harassment. The news made local headlines, and suddenly, everyone in San Antonio knew about the Meadowbrook Estates HOA scandal. I got calls from reporters asking for interviews, but Mitchell advised me to stay quiet until after the criminal trial. Our civil lawsuit was still pending, and we did not want to do anything that might compromise that case. The criminal trial began in late August. Mitchell and I attended, sitting in the public gallery and watching as the prosecution laid out their case. It was damning. They had records showing that the HOA had collected over $40,000 in fraudulent fees from property owners who were never actually part of the HOA. They had emails showing that Susan and the other board members knew exactly what they were doing and had discussed how to intimidate people into paying. The harassment evidence was even worse. The prosecution presented testimony from multiple victims, including the elderly couple who had paid fees for over a year because they were afraid the HOA would foreclose on their property. They showed the footage of the protest at my gate and emails proving that Susan had organized it specifically to intimidate me. Susan's defense attorney tried to argue that she had been misinformed about the HOA's authority and had acted in good faith, but the evidence contradicted that at every turn. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Susan Carmichael was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the victims. The other 2 board members received lighter sentences, but both faced jail time and hefty fines. The Meadowbrook Estates. HOA itself was dissolved by court order, and the property owners in that neighborhood were free to form a new association if they wanted or simply live without one. Our civil lawsuit settled shortly after the criminal verdict. The HOA's insurance paid out a substantial sum to cover my legal fees, damages, and compensation for the harassment I had endured. It was not about the money for me. It was about making sure they could never do this to anyone else. By the time fall rolled around, life had finally returned to normal. I could work on my ranch without worrying about protesters or HOA board members showing up. My cattle grazed peacefully, my pregnant mare had delivered a healthy foal, and I could sit on my porch in the evening without feeling like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. One afternoon in late September, I was out mending that same section of fence I had been working on when this whole nightmare started. The Texas heat had finally broken, and there was a cool breeze coming in from the west. It felt good to be doing simple, honest work without any drama. A truck pulled up to my gate, and for a moment, my stomach clenched. But it was just Tom Rodriguez, the county inspector who had checked out my ranch months ago. "Mr. Ashford," he called out. "Got a minute?" "Sure, come on in." Tom walked over, looking around at the property. "Place looks good. I just wanted to stop by and let you know that complaint from the Meadowbrook HOA has been officially closed and purged from your record. It is like it never happened." "I appreciate that. I also wanted to apologize. We should have shut them down faster. A lot of people got hurt because we did not take their complaints seriously enough." "You did your job. You came out, you verified everything was legal, and you wrote an honest report. That is all anyone can ask." Tom nodded. "Well, if you ever need anything from the county, do not hesitate to call. And for what it is worth, I am glad you fought back. Too many people just cave to HOAs because they do not know their rights." After Tom left, I stood there for a while, looking out over my land. 60 acres of Texas ranch country, mine free and clear, with no HOA, no board, no ridiculous rules about grass height or barn colors. Just open space, honest work, and the freedom to live life on my own terms. The whole experience had taught me something important. There are people in this world who think rules and authority give them the right to control others, even when they have no legitimate power at all. They rely on intimidation, bureaucracy, and the assumption that most people will not fight back. But when you stand your ground, when you know your rights and refuse to be bullied, those people crumble fast. Susan Carmichael had thought she could expand her little kingdom by force, annexing properties and collecting fees from people who did not know any better. She had thought that official-looking letters and threats of fines would be enough to make me fall in line. She was wrong. The county clerk had been clear from the start. The HOA had zero authority over my property. They never had, and they never would. All the harassment, all the complaints, all the protests had been nothing more than smoke and mirrors, a desperate attempt to intimidate me into submission. It had not worked. I finished mending the fence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear my cattle settling in for the night. It was peaceful. It was home. And it was mine. Completely and utterly mine, with no HOA in sight. A few weeks later, Mitchell called me with one final piece of news. "Nathan, you might want to drive past Meadowbrook Estates sometime. It is interesting." "Why would I want to do that?" "Just trust me. Take a look." Curiosity got the better of me, so the next time I was heading into San Antonio, I took a detour past the neighborhood. What I saw made me laugh out loud. About a third of the houses had "for sale" signs in their yards. Several lawns were overgrown, clearly violating the old HOA standards that no longer existed. One house had painted their door bright purple. Another had installed a fountain in their front yard that looked like a dolphin leaping out of the water. Without the iron fist of the HOA to control every aspect of their lives, the residents of Meadowbrook Estates were finally expressing themselves. Some were leaving, probably traumatized by the whole scandal. Others were clearly enjoying their newfound freedom. I drove home smiling, thinking about how life has a way of working itself out. The people who had tried to control my property were gone, their authority stripped away, their leader in prison. And I was still here, doing exactly what I had always done, living exactly how I wanted to live. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and watched the stars come out. The night was quiet except for the sounds of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle. My dog, a blue heeler named Duke, who had been by my side through this whole ordeal, lay at my feet content. "We won, boy," I said, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "We actually won." Duke thumped his tail against the porch boards, and I took that as agreement. The next morning, I got up before dawn like I always did, and headed out to start my chores. There was hay to distribute, water troughs to check, and 100 other small tasks that came with running a ranch. It was hard work, but it was good work, and it was mine. As I worked, I thought about all the people who had not been as lucky as me. The elderly couple who had paid fraudulent fees for a year, the horse ranch that had been harassed, all the residents of Meadowbrook Estates who had lived under Susan's tyrannical rule. The system had failed them for a while, but eventually, justice had prevailed. Around mid-morning, a car pulled up to my gate. I tensed instinctively, but then I recognized the driver. It was Rachel Delgado, the county clerk. "Ms. Delgado," I said, walking over, "this is a surprise." "Mr. Ashford, I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to stop by personally to let you know that we have updated our procedures at the county clerk's office. Any future HOA expansion requests will be subject to much more scrutiny, and we will be proactively notifying affected property owners before any paperwork is even processed." "That is good to hear. What happened to you should never have gotten as far as it did. If we had caught this earlier, you would have been spared a lot of trouble." "I appreciate that. But honestly, the fact that you shut them down when we came to you is what mattered. You did not just rubber stamp their request and move on." Rachel smiled. "I am glad we could help. And I want you to know that if you ever have any issues with the county, any questions about your property rights or zoning, you can call me directly." She handed me a business card with her direct line written on the back. I thanked her, and she left. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It meant that people in positions of authority were paying attention, that they recognized when things went wrong and were trying to fix the system. Over the next few months, I heard occasional updates about what was happening with the former Meadowbrook Estates board members. Susan Carmichael was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility and had apparently filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied. The other two board members had served their shorter sentences and were released, but both had moved out of the area, probably unable to face the community after everything that had happened. The residents of Meadowbrook Estates did eventually form a new HOA, but it was nothing like the old one. The new board had reasonable rules, focused mainly on maintaining common areas and organizing community events. There were no fines for grass height, no approved color palettes, no mandatory inspections. It was what an HOA should be, a voluntary organization that served the community rather than controlling it. Life moved on. I continued working my ranch, selling cattle, and enjoying the peace and quiet of rural Texas. I never received another letter from an HOA, never had another protest at my gate, never had to deal with Susan Carmichael or anyone like her again. But I did not forget the lessons I had learned. I kept Mitchell on retainer, just in case. I maintained my security cameras and documentation systems, and whenever I heard about someone else dealing with HOA problems, I made sure they knew their rights and knew that fighting back was possible. One evening in early November, almost 7 months after this whole thing had started, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Mitchell. "Nathan, I thought you would want to know. Susan Carmichael's final appeal was denied. She is going to serve her full sentence." Good. There is something else. Several other property owners who were affected by the Meadowbrook HOA have reached out to me. They want to file civil suits similar to yours. I am going to be representing them. I hope they get the same result we did. I think they will. The precedent we set is strong. HOAs are not going to be able to get away with this kind of behavior anymore, at least not in Bexar County. After I hung up, I sat there thinking about how one person standing up can create a ripple effect. By refusing to be bullied, by fighting back against Susan and her board, I had not just protected my own property. I had helped expose a criminal enterprise and set a precedent that would protect other property owners in the future. It felt good. Better than any settlement check or court victory. It felt like I had done something meaningful, something that mattered beyond just my own little corner of Texas. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, I raised my beer in a silent toast. To property rights, to standing your ground, to the county clerks who actually do their jobs and the lawyers who fight the good fight, and to the downfall of petty tyrants everywhere, especially ones named Susan. Duke woofed softly, as if agreeing with my sentiment, and I reached down to scratch his ears again. Life was good. Life was peaceful. And most importantly, life was mine to live on my own terms without anyone trying to annex my ranch into their district or tell me what color to paint my barn. The nightmare was over, and justice had been served. Susan Carmichael had zero authority over my property, the county clerk had confirmed it, and the courts had punished her for trying to claim otherwise. It was exactly the ending this story deserved. As I headed inside for the night, I took one last look at my land, stretching out under the stars. 60 acres of freedom, hard-earned and well-defended. No HOA would ever take that away from me. Not now, not ever. And that, I thought as I closed the door behind me, was exactly how it should be.